Today, we are talking to Mr. Sylvester Mack, formerly a sales engineer who headed up a leverage buyout that landed him a company to run. Sometimes I have to convince my interviewees that they are part of the history of Silicon Valley. Started your own company and how that happened and how you got here and all that good stuff.
Okay, well, I admit that my story's a little interesting.
Just a tiny bit, you know.
Yeah, it's a little different. So, where do you want me to start?
So tell me.
I was born.
Yeah. Just tell me where you were born, how you got to Silicon Valley.
Okay. I was born in Louisville, Kentucky. The oldest of three siblings. Grew up in a home with my mom and my dad. Both of them were government civil service workers, low end of scale, GS2 or GS3. Okay. My dad worked out at, he's ex-Navy in World War II, but he worked out at Fort Knox, and my mom worked for the Navy Department across the river in Jeffersonville, Indiana, at the Naval Ordnance Plant. They used to rebuild the big guns for the ships. And she was a clerk there. Went to all black schools. Matter of fact, I never went to school with a white person until I got to high school. There was one white guy who's an Italian guy, Anzolini, so he was maybe half black. So, but both my mother and father were fairly intelligent. My mother had graduated second in her high school class, Central High School, same high school that Muhammad Ali went to. I went to Central also, and I graduated first in my class.
Okay.
Valedictorian class of about 430 students. And because I was pretty much a straight A student all the way through to that point, I was particularly strong in math and science. So I was, when I was evaluating what I would do for a career to get me out of this housing project that we lived in all my life, I kind of settled on engineering.
Okay.
And so doing my due diligence, I had narrowed it down to a number of schools. I graduated from high school in '67, so the thought of coming south from Kentucky was something I really didn't consider. So I looked at schools like Northwestern, Purdue, Missouri Rolla, Carnegie Mellon, some others. And I wound up being a National Achievement Scholar, which is kind of the black division of National Merit. So I had won that time, $6,000 scholarship to go to college. So, that won't pay for your books nowadays. But
yeah, that was a fortune then, though.
Yeah, but that $6,000 pretty much paid for my tuition and fees for the 4 years I was at Purdue. So we actually, Purdue, the year I came out, started recruiting black students who didn't surprisingly play football or basketball. Because up until that time, Purdue at the time I got there was like 26,000 students, of which there were about 200 black students, and most of them had a football or basketball in one hand or the other. Okay.
Yeah.
Of those 200, we had about 25 or 30 black women. So it was because of Purdue was geared towards engineering and technology. In the state of Indiana, if you wanted to be a teacher, you went to IU or Ball State. If you wanted to be an engineer or a technician, you went to Purdue. So, wound up going there. Was shaken to my core. I was a straight A student through high school. I got the first 2 D's in my life the first semester at Purdue. So they broke me down and let me know I wasn't all that in a box of chips.
Okay. Reality had to set in eventually.
Yeah, it set in real quick, and I was shaken to my core. I remember getting on a Greyhound bus and going home for Thanksgiving, and I was about 175 miles away, and I didn't know if I was going to make it. I tell you, because I had never been through anything so tough. But I came to find out that was a standard operating procedure at Purdue. they don't hand out degrees at that school. It's tough to get through that school. And so once I got up to speed and figured out how you study at this level, and actually ended up having my best grades when I was in school in my sophomore year. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I played an instrumental music starting in the 5th grade, so I played trombone. So I've been marching in high school, and I ended up marching and playing in the band at Purdue for 4 years. So that was my major activity until I pledged fraternity, Omega Psi Phi, in my sophomore year. Mm-hmm. So I became an Omega. So between those two activities, that was a big part of my social life, and to this day, it's still a big part of my life because I'm very much into electronics and music, and I'm very much into my fraternity, and so I've been active. I like them and all that good stuff. So, got my degree in 4 years, and typically for Purdue, the average is 5 to get through that school. Yeah. But I got through in 4 years. I had to take 23 hours the first semester of my senior year and 21 hours second semester to get out on time to make up for some courses I flunked my junior year. Right. But my money ran out after 4 years, so I didn't have the option of coming back for another semester. So we got out, and I got my first flight on an airplane to go to some of my interview trips, and I made, I think, 6 trips, and I got 5 job offers. So ended up going with a company that's actually based in my hometown, American Air Filter. They did HVAC, air filtration, air pollution control equipment, and I became a sales engineer. So surprisingly, although I majored in electrical engineering, I found out when I was still in school, due to the summer jobs I had, I worked 2 summers for General Electric. I really didn't like doing engineering design work. I found it dull and boring, actually. And so I didn't ditch my major. I just, when I started interviewing, I looked for sales jobs or manufacturing or anything other than design. Right. And so I took a sales engineering job, got shipped off to a sales office in Detroit. I had asked to go to San Francisco, but they gave me Detroit, which was cool because I had relatives, a lot of aunts and uncles up there. All my father's sisters and brothers lived in Detroit. So as a kid, we used to do summer trips up to Detroit. So I was somewhat familiar with Detroit. But one day in 1976, the manager asked me if I would consider a transfer to the San Francisco office. I thought about it in a nanosecond and said, yes, I'm out of here, So that's how I got to California. Okay. And I stayed with that company until 1979 when they wanted to move me back to Kentucky into a marketing role there. And I said, I don't want to leave California. They said, well, Sylvester, if you don't leave, you don't have a job. I said, well, I guess I don't have a job. So at that point in time, we parted ways. And so I started off kind of at rock bottom, living with a fraternity brother on the east side of San Jose until I landed a job with Applied Materials, which is now the largest semiconductor equipment manufacturer in the world. So I went in as a marketing engineer with them. One of the benefits of having that engineering degree is that I spent my whole year in technical fields, primarily sales and marketing related, but I had no issue with picking up the technology and then being able to talk to other engineers who I'm trying to sell some equipment to or whatever. So I found my niche, and I like the independence of planning my day. I generally had a company car, so I decided where I'd go. And when I got to California, my office was actually in San Francisco, but I lived in San Jose because I couldn't, at the time, coming from Detroit, I couldn't afford anything closer to San Francisco than San Jose, and I was renting at the time. So anyway, my territory went from Monterey up to the Oregon border along the coast, but most of it was in San Francisco, and I was calling on architects and engineers who did build buildings, and I was trying to get my equipment specified to go into the building. And then I was working with contractors, who were the people who actually buy the equipment to put into the building. So you're doing technical sales to one group, and you're actually selling equipment to another group. Once I got to Applied Materials, I became a marketing manager, and I began to travel internationally. I supported our sales reps in Europe primarily, and so I got my first trips out of the country to go support them in the field, and I would host international visitors who would come into the factory. I was promoted from product marketing engineer to product marketing manager, and then I became a key account manager for AMD and Intel for Applied Materials. So that was the job I had until I ran afoul of some higher-ups who didn't like my style. Yeah. So I had to find somewhere else in the company, and I did. And then when we hit a downturn, I got laid off. So for those roughly 2 months, the only time in my career where I didn't have a job.
To explain to me what your style was.
Well, it can be political because the person complaining about me was a person of Asian descent. Because a lot of the decision makers in the semiconductor industry in Silicon Valley many of them are Asians and Indians. Mm-hmm. My style, that's how my boss conveyed it to me. They just didn't like whatever it was I was doing. Although, in my defense, I said, well, what customer is complaining and what did they have to say? You never get a straight answer.
Yeah.
So, although I was technically laid off, I was being paid as a consultant, doing some marketing studies for the boss I had before I got laid off. And then in fairness to Applied, they did offer me a job once I found a job with a competitor. And so they did offer me a position back, but I figured I had enemies in high places. Uh-huh. And so particularly when you're in sales and marketing, there's a lot of politics involved. In various parts of the company.
Well, tell me, how do you handle politics, as you put it? How would you handle that?
In most instances, except for my time at Applied, in many instances, I was in a remote sales office, so you're away from upper management. And so you're really only having to deal with your immediate boss, who's typically a sales manager or a director of sales, and he's reporting to a VP somewhere else. And so for the most part, you're left to do what you do. As long as you bring in results, it's a pretty nice place to be in my mind. Mm-hmm. But when you're close to the home office, and in my case, I was a key account manager. So although I didn't have direct sales responsibility for all of Intel and all of AMD, because they have plants in Albuquerque and in Texas, and they have plants in Silicon Valley. Although I would call on some of the spots in Silicon Valley, there was always a layer of salespeople in these other places who had direct sales call responsibility, and I was supposed to manage their interactions with my two key customers. So I had kind of a sales/management role. Okay, and at the time we were doing very little business with either of those companies. So, if somebody got questioned about why we weren't doing that well, then I'm the obvious target. It happens. Sometimes you're in the wrong place at the wrong time. I have friends who can't seem to hold on to a job because they have these issues with management. Somebody doesn't like the way they do it, or they, or maybe there's something wrong with that individual. I don't know. I've always tried to figure out basically that as a black person in white America, That's one of the reasons I was glad I decided to go to a predominantly white school, because I had no experience dealing with folks who didn't look like me. And so, but I also figured out that I can't be afraid of the way people make decisions, because a lot of times I lost a whole lot of jobs over the years. For every one you got, you lost 9 or 10. You never knew why sometimes you lost, but you learn these homonyms that say, well, people buy from their friends. So that's why people take people to lunch and they try to develop a rapport. And so I saw that worked sometimes, because sometimes I didn't have the low price, but one of my contractor friends who liked me personally as a person, the way I service his business, whatever, he would call me and say, Sylvester, if you can meet this price, I'll give you the business. Mm-hmm. Probably doesn't get any better than that. I always felt that, if you do your best and try to certainly be competent, but also make people like you as somebody they want to do business with, really gives you a better chance to get there. I never really assumed that I didn't get that job because he doesn't like black people, he doesn't like Sylvester Mack, whatever. It's just that's the way the world works. People are different, and they buy for their own reasons. And so, as long as I was selling enough to hold on to my job, I guess I'm doing okay.
So the essentially what you're saying is you understood the politics, but you didn't play the politics.
Right. I never played golf. Culturally, growing up in a house, in a 100% black housing project, I never socially was willing to compromise what made me comfortable to say, okay, I'm going to become O.J. Simpson here and live in their world and pretend that I'm not who I am. I kind of accepted the fact that I probably put a ceiling over my head that said, Sylvester, you're never going to rise to these levels of upper management because you don't play the game. I don't do anything stupid, but I never felt like I wanted to pucker up for anybody, And so I'm going to do what you expected me to do, and I'm going to do my best, but, there are limits to what I'm going to do.
Golf was not one of the things you were going to do then?
No, I don't play golf. I'm not very athletic. I marched in the band, but I was always the last guy picked when it was a pickup basketball game, even though I'm 6'3". I've got cousins who was an All-American. One of them played in the NBA. I didn't get that gene.
You're an engineer.
Yeah, I was an engineer. I was a guy who spent his time in the library. So when I left Applied Materials, I landed at a company, CTX, that was owned by Motorola. I was selling for them, but they were developing a cell controller, which is a computer that's used to handle the manufacturing floor. They shared a building over in Sunnyvale with a company called Phase 2 Automation, which was a robotics clean room automation company. Because CTX was still developing their product, Phase 2 was selling. CTX was in the semiconductor market. Phase 2 was in the disk drive business. The guy who was running Phase 2 asked me if I would sell for them too, so I did. Well, actually, Motorola came in and shut down CTX, so I pushed my desk down the hall and I'm now on the Phase 2 side, selling for them. And then about a year later, the day of the big earthquake in 1989, I was over in Asia, traveling with a guy who was then president of Phase 2 Automation. He was an interesting story. There were 4 guys out of Stanford who started up this automation company. Tim Kugel is the guy that is now president of the company. He's one of the 4 original founders. He's the only one that had stuck with it. So he had urged me, he and I were in Japan, and then I was going on to Korea or somewhere. I didn't know where I was going. But he said, well, Sylvester, I'd really like you to come back early for this meeting we're having. So I said, well, I've got appointments set up. I was going to Korea, and then I was going to Singapore. And I said, well, I don't have anything set up firm yet for Singapore, so I'll go to Korea, and then I'll back. So I got in the day of the big earthquake. So at that meeting, they announced that Motorola was going to shut down Phase 2 Automation. And I looked around the room, and I see people dusting up their resumes mentally. After the meeting, The guy who was he wasn't an employee, but he was a consultant. And he came to me and said, Sylvester, we would like for you to lead the group to buy this company, do a leverage buyout and buy it from Motorola. And I thought about it. And since I was relatively new to the situation, I saw the products that they had. Mm-hmm. And they really had two very strong customers. We had Comag and IBM. I got excited about it. So I said yes. Of those 30, 35 people, only 12 of us decided to go with the new phase 2. We decided we would, put money into the company. So I'm the only one that went and got a $50,000 mortgage on his house, second mortgage. So I put in the biggest chunk of money.
Yeah.
We were doing a leverage buyout. So, the money that we put in wasn't really what was necessary to buy the company because we signed notes with Motorola that says we will pay you. And we negotiated with them to get out of the building. The building we were in over by the soup can over there in Sunnyvale was much too big for what we needed. 12 of us going to be rattling around in this building. And so we got somebody to tell us what the furniture and the computers and everything was worth. And we came up with an offer to Motorola that they accepted because they didn't really want to be known as this big company that bought up all these little companies years back, and now they were shoveling dirt on all of them. Their whole thing was they were going to grow one of these small companies or several of these small companies into major revenue producing divisions of Motorola. Never happened. So with myself and the three, I call us the four musketeers and the other 8 worker bees, we started off January, I guess New Year's Day we didn't work because the deal closed December 31st of 89.
Okay.
And so the first, right after New Year's, we opened a still phase 2 automation. And I went around to our major customers and say, hey, I'm the new sheriff in town, and, please give us enough business to keep us.
Keep the doors open.
Yeah. And as the tale unfolds, we were profitable our first year.
Okay.
The 12 of us, and we did roughly $2 million in sales. And again, it was because there's a fellow named Ellery over at Comag. He was in charge of the test systems at Comag. And phase 2 had built the robotic system that did the testing. Uh-huh. And this was a black man.
Okay.
And so the day I walked in there and told the president of Comag and others that I'm the new sheriff in town and please give us some business, Ellery was delighted, And he said, so Sylvester, don't worry, I got you. So, we of that first $2 million that we made, we got one order from Comag that was worth over $700,000 of that.
What was the name of the black gentleman at Comag?
Ellery, I think his last name was Blake.
Blake.
Ellery. Yeah.
Okay.
And there was also another black man who was like badge number 5, I think, at Comag. He was actually a fraternity brother of mine.
Oh.
He was a little bit more of a tougher nut to crack, but he was in charge of automation. He was a little more skeptical. Not that he had anything against me or phase 2, because the test department decisions had not really been his. It took him a little longer to come around, but he eventually did. So Comag was my largest customer. I ran this company, this automation company, for 10 years. It went under in 2000. So from 1980, we had increasing sales in 81, 82. There was a downturn. We almost went out of business in 83, 84. Then it came back. And one of the interesting stories was my second biggest customer was IBM. IBM was also a technology leader. So IBM developed a process called lube, which you dip the disk in a hard disk drive. The data resides on a disk, and the disk is what's spinning inside of the drive. And the heads fly over the disks. And if the head should come in contact, let's say you shut the drive off and it comes in contact, if the head rests on the disk, there's a phenomenon called stiction. So it kind of gets there, and then when you try to fire it up again, it kind of wants, because of electromagnetic forces and other things, it wants to stick there and doesn't want to let the thing turn. And it can lead to failure of the drive. So IBM developed this process which puts this secret sauce on the disk and solves the stiction problem. Nobody was doing that. So IBM developed this process. And because some of the higher-ups at IBM saw that, one, phase 2 is now owned by a black man. We've got all this business we do with the U.S. government. And they're always asking us, well, how much of your business goes to minority? And they can look on their books and say, well, we got this janitorial service, and we got this one, and we got that one, but nobody builds major equipment for us that we use in our production, except phase 2. And now they're a black-owned company. So they were delighted when I walked through the door. And so they told me, well, Sylvester, you go down here and join the minority supplier development group that are supposed to put together minority vendors and big major corporations. And so I did. And more importantly for my company, by the development of this lube process, we also developed the automation for that lube process, working with their engineers in San Jose. And so once they got that into production, we ordered a bunch more lube machines. But then the other people that we were selling to, Seagate, Western Digital, and Comag, they of course copied IBM, and they started doing lube machines. And so when the word got out, when I told them that we were doing lube machines for IBM, we ended up selling lube systems to everybody. And so that powered our growth 94, 95, 96, 97, from the $2.5 million range to, at the 97, we were up around 10 million. Now, well, 9.3, the high one.
Pretty close.
Yeah. So at that point, my personal plan was, I had a plan that I wanted to retire by age 50. So 2000, I would have been 50. We hired a firm out of Walnut Creek to tell us what it was worth. Because, in the world of private business, yes, we had stock, but it was all internal. So, a business is only worth what somebody will pay you for it.
Right.
Okay. So you try to establish a valuation based on what your sales are, what the projections look like, profitability, and all this stuff. So rule of thumb is, for a privately owned company, you've got to show 3 years of solid profitability to get a multiple of anywhere from 1.5 to 3x times what your sales are. So theoretically, if your sales are $9 million and everything else lines up perfectly, you might be able to sell the company for $27 million, assuming you can find the right buyer. But that's how the world works. That's how you have to find that buyer. And then when you do find that buyer, that's the number you start with, and then the rest of it's haggling and how good of a job you do selling what you can do versus what they think you can do. So, and we got that close, very, very close to selling the company. I would have walked away after a couple levels of taxation with about $3.5 to $4.5 million. Mm-hmm. And I would have had to stay on for a year and a half, 2 years under some non-compete clause to make sure there was a smooth transition. But that was my personal plan, and I would have, by very close to my 51st, 52nd birthday, I would have been on a beach in Caribbean.
You would have been home free, as they say.
Yeah. And luck would have it, we hit another big downturn, and the company I was negotiating with, they were flying me, we were very serious, they were flying me around on their corporate jet, and I was visiting other companies around the country that they had bought and talking with their management to see, what the transition would look like. So things were trending very, very well, and they were half $500 million company, so they were big enough to give me my little money, but their board their president came under fire because they were an automation company too. And the thing about automation is when business turns down, the spigot gets shut off. So your customers quit buying the automation equipment because they fear they can do, they got enough right now. Particularly if you're in a downturn and your production goes down, you don't need to buy more automation. So it's a purchase that can easily get deferred.
Yeah.
On top of that, my company was strictly focused on the disk drive business. That had been kind of headquartered in Silicon Valley. Disk drives were developed by IBM, and the rest of the industry had grown up in Silicon Valley. And so, but by this time, they had started moving production offshore. So IBM built a big plant in Shenzhen, China, which is right off the other side of Hong Kong. Mm-hmm. And Comag had built plants in Malaysia. Seagate had built plants in China. And Western Digital, they were moving towards China also. So we didn't have really any patented technology. We had know-how. We knew how to do it. And we know the tricks of the trade to move stuff around in a clean room and not generate particles, which breaks the yield. So, but it wasn't rocket science so once the buying decisions started to move offshore, in my first 6 years, all of the buying decisions were still right there in San Jose and in Silicon Valley. Mm-hmm. But now people who didn't look like me were in charge, and IBM started letting go of some of the reins they used to have, but they used to say, no, you buy this, and because they wanted to make sure the process that they did in San Jose was the same one they were doing over in China. Mm-hmm. And so but once those decisions started moving offshore, I could start to see the handwriting on the wall. So we started losing the ability to get any more orders because this downturn it lasted about a year and a half, mm-hmm. 2 years. So the orders went from 9 million in the previous year down to maybe we did 2 million the following year. So by this time I've got 43 employees, and so by the middle of I think I ended up closing the doors in April of 2000. April of 2000.
Yeah.
So we ended up taking the remnants of the company and melding it with the company that I ended up working for in my last 14 years out there in the working world, a company called Optical Associates. The president of that company is a Jewish fellow, Charlie Church, who had been my boss back at Applied Materials. Huh. And when I had phase 2, I had asked him to be on my board of directors. So he was one of my outside directors too. And at our high water mark, we were more profitable and a little bit larger company than him. But we folded up, but we still had customers. So we had to convince them that we were still capable of doing projects for them. Mm-hmm. But the project, the order level had certainly decreased, and we were able to get some significant orders over the next couple of years. But it gradually wound down such that it wasn't a significant part of Optical Associates business anymore. And so I took the title of Vice President of International Sales and Marketing. So I was traveling to Asia for 2 weeks at a shot 3 or 4 times a year, riding herd over our reps in the various countries.
Tell me, how many of those people that you managed were from that country? Were they all from those countries, or did you bring Americans, expats over with you?
I had one guy who was based in the Philippines who was American. And he used to travel us to some of the places that I didn't want to go to. But we had to let him go. And so at that point, I ramped up my travel schedule. So I would go for 2 weeks at a shot. So I typically go to China I always would fly to Japan because I flew Delta. They always stop in Tokyo. If I had business in Japan, I'd go into Tokyo. If not, I'd go on to either Korea, Singapore, Shanghai, Hong Kong, Thailand, Australia. English is the language of business, particularly if you're going to be in high tech or you're going to be doing business with the West. Almost everybody has some ability in English.
But what about culturally? Did you have to change your behavior from country to country, or did they acquiesce to you?
There are cultural differences, certainly between the Koreans, the Japanese, the Chinese. In Singapore, you got a very different mix. But except I was still old school, so I wore a coat and tie almost every day when I traveled. In Japan, of course, you don't go anywhere without a coat and tie. In Singapore, nobody's crazy enough to walk around with a coat and tie. It's too hot. Okay, and so your salespeople are dressed in a dress shirt or just a shirt, and that's acceptable. So I wear dress slacks. Leave the coat in the hotel. China, it was. I always erred to the side of having a coat and tie. Most places, the only place I really dress down would be in Singapore.
In Singapore,
everybody takes their coat off.
I would imagine Singapore and in the West, in America, you didn't have to really dress up, did you?
Well, yeah, it generally was more formal than it is now in the U.S. Because a lot of places people don't wear coats and ties anymore. Language is not really that much of a problem. In some instances, all of my reps who were, let's say, native Chinese, many of them were, or indigenous Chinese. They spoke very good English, most of them. So when we were talking with a customer that didn't have a good comprehension of English, and I would speak a little bit. They translate, so I had a translator there all the time. Yeah. I consider a lot of the people that I work with as my friends. I mean, when my first trips to Asia, I counted up in my passports. I probably made 50 trips to Asia for my working career. So I've been to the Great Wall 3 times. I've been to the main tombs, and so previous trips I'd seen the sights. But they always made sure that if I wanted to do something on the weekend, because I had to decide where I was going to spend my weekends. Later on, I knew enough about subway systems and the train systems and all that I could pretty much get around, even in Japan. You get outside of Tokyo, they lose the English signs. Around Tokyo, there's no problem. But you get outside of Tokyo and you look up there and everything's in Japanese. But invariably, there'll be a little white-haired lady will come over and say, "May I help you?" with perfect English. And they'll tell you, I said, I got to get back to Tokyo. Which way do I go? So it was never a problem. As many times as I've been to Shanghai, I only had one taxi driver who understood English. So you learn pretty quickly that before you leave your hotel, you have a card of the hotel so you can show it to somebody so they'll get you back. And then you have them fill out in Chinese where it is you want to go. So just hand them a card because 99 times out of 100 they don't speak English. So, just little tricks of the trade that you learn traveling as much as I did. So,
did you ever go into mainland China though?
All the time, yeah.
So, what was it like dealing with a communist country?
Americans have this image that it's this terrible communist country.
Yeah.
First off, I made my first trip to China in 1984. Just married Paul in '83, and my first trip, I spent 19 days in China. I was traveling with a fellow that had been born in Beijing. But in 1984, China was still in the dark ages.
Yeah.
I mean, literally, we flew into Beijing. First, I flew into Hong Kong, which was eye-opening. Hong Kong is one of the most metropolitan and most interesting places to visit on the planet. And then we flew into Beijing, and this was back in February. And we got into the Beijing airport. There were all of these very serious guys with submachine guns standing around, and got off the plane. We walked down a ramp onto the tarmac, as I remember, and then into the building. There was almost nobody in this huge airport. So this was before China even started developing. People lived in huts, and there was a lot of construction going on, but they were moving their population from these, what I call them, hovels, to these high-rise buildings. High-rises everywhere.
Yeah.
But they had no concept of landscaping or anything like that. So Beijing is kind of like where Chicago is in the United States. It's cold, winds come down to there, and the dust is, it's like nuclear winter. Literally, my first 10, 12, 15 trips to China, I never saw the sunshine. I mean, unless you were in Shanghai or down in southern China, just around Hong Kong, the air is a little cleaner. But anywhere around Beijing, even the broad daylight, it's just like it's always a cloudy day. You know, the air quality was so horrible. But walking around at night by myself, and one thing you feel very safe. It's totally different to walk around in some city, some large city in the United States, where you constantly got your head on a swivel, wondering who's knocking your head.
Right.
The only time I felt anything of the communist state was if you're sitting in your hotel room, say watching most of the Western style hotels they'll have a French channel, a German channel, or a Russian channel, but I'm watching CNN International, and so if the story comes on about the Uyghurs, where the Chinese are discriminating against them and this ethnic group,
right, your
screen goes black, dark. Just goes black.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Then a couple minutes later, when the story's finished, your screen come back on. And that's really the only time I felt like there was any government intrusion. Again, I've never lived there, but I've spent 3, 4, 5, 6 days in China in a stretch. You don't really see policemen that much. You walk around Tiananmen Square. I mean, I'm sure they've got people. You don't see a police presence like, in America, you see a cop car, you got to see a cop who's got a gun strapped on him. In Hong Kong, you don't see any of that. The Chinese people seem to be relatively happy. It's changed a lot, because they got 1.3 billion people.
Right.
So now you've got a population of 300 to 400 million, which is the size of the United States, who are pretty middle class. You go to Shanghai now, you see more Mercedes and BMWs. It's almost gridlock all over the city because these people are making big money. The government has made a pact with the Chinese people. We will let you earn whatever it is you want to earn. Just keep us in power. So that's the deal they've made. And they have these 10-year, 5-year, and 10-year plans where they lay out what they're going to develop next. And from that standpoint, they've done a fantastic job because you could never get as much as they've gotten done in China here in America because, we've got Republicans now saying, no, we're not going to spend money on anything.
Right.
Give up the power. It appears to me that it works pretty well for the Chinese people because when I first went over there, everybody made about $90 US a month. I don't care whether you were a street sweeper, cab driver, a doctor, whatever. Everybody made in this very narrow band. That was in 1984. Now you got, more multi-millionaires than you got here in the United States. So, and everything in between. So people fly around and, they got several Chinese airlines. And train stations are crowded. The airlines are packed. And people seem to be living reasonably good lives.
Right.
Well, my first trip, I was talking to one of the guides who was showing me around, and she kept looking around. And I said, "What are you looking for?" And she said, "Oh, you have to be very careful. I'm not supposed to talk."
You're not supposed to talk?
This was in 1984 because I was a foreigner.
Oh.
And she was assigned to me. My purpose for visiting with her, I was there to visit a factory because we were, company Applied Material was thinking about selling some of our older product lines in Chinese. And it would be my call whether I felt comfortable with what I saw about the factories they were going to build it in, and whether or not they were capable of not giving our reputation of black eye if we turned it over to them.
Yeah, but she couldn't talk to you, and she's guiding you.
She did. Yeah, she wanted to know about my Western lifestyle. Like, she'd ask me questions. Well, how many TVs do you have?
Yeah.
I had to count them up. We had 6. Well, back in those days, there was one TV in the village. You could see it. And everybody in the village would come out, and they would all be watching whatever the one program was in the evening. Because it was either that or nothing,
Yeah.
And so, again, this was back in the dark ages of 1984. Now, that's not the case anymore. But so she was just interested. She had damn few opportunities to talk to us.
Right.
Because I'm 6'3" and a black man. I mean, I remember now my first trip. And as I walked by people who were walking towards me, and then all of a sudden I would stop and turn around. Everybody I had passed had stopped and was gazing at me. As if they had never seen a black guy, particularly one who was 6'3".
Yeah.
In their life. I mean, I was a real oddity. And but they were scary, but they weren't. It wasn't a malicious stare. It was more wonderment.
Yeah. Curiosity.
And you could see it in their eyes that they were just, I was something they had never seen before.
Maybe they thought you were a movie star.
Well, I didn't get into all of that, but they know I was different. So
So what made you, what decision making went into moving back to the southern states?
Well, economics. I was trying to make it till 66 so I could get my full Social Security, but I got put out the pack a year early. So 2014, I had a choice to go on full commission, just working commission hours. When phase 2 went under in 2000, I had to make some payroll when things got bad. I got some seconds from my house. And, I had I was almost to the point I had drawing a salary. And I loved California, but I spent 36 years there. And,
Yes.
And all of my family, for the most part, was back this way. I got fraternity brothers here that I would see at homecoming. They said, well, Sylvester, you got to come check Atlanta. I had been to Atlanta a few times, but once I got into it, I found out that I could build a house, but what I could buy one that's already built. And on our 4th trip to Atlanta, my 4th trip, and following me 2 trips, on the very last day, we came to the house we eventually bought. You come and we can block out some dates, and we'll show the dirty South.
Okie dokie. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Thank you, Sylvester, for sharing your experiences with us. You persevered through a changing market and social issues. Your positive attitude and intelligence are an inspiration to those looking to make their mark in the world of tech. You will inspire all those that wish to make it on their own. Thank you, Sylvester Mack, and thank you for listening.